Zixtara stood before the great crystal display in the Confederation Science Council chambers and felt the familiar tingle of excitement that came with a new assignment. The massive screen showed star charts and data streams from across the galaxy, but today it focused on one particular system that had become quite interesting to the galactic community: the human system. "Observer Zixtara," spoke Council Leader Vorthan, his tentacles moving in the formal patterns of official communication. "You have been selected for what we consider to be one of our most important observation missions in recent cycles." Zixtara's breathing slits fluttered with pride. In their 47 years of service as a xenobiologist specializing in combat psychology, they had studied the warfare patterns of 32 different species. Each assignment had added valuable data to the Confederation's vast libraries of knowledge about how different races conducted military operations. The patterns were always similar, always predictable, always rational. "The species in question," continued Vorthan, "are called humans. They have recently joined our galactic community and are currently engaged in their first interstellar conflict. Our early reports suggest they possess some unusual tactical approaches that warrant closer study." The display shifted to show images of human soldiers in their primitive but functional armor. Zixtara examined the bipedal creatures with interest. They appeared physically unremarkable compared to many warrior species the Confederation had encountered. No natural weapons, no enhanced muscle density, no protective carapaces. Their technology seemed adequate but not advanced. Yet something about them had caught the attention of the Council. "What makes them particularly interesting," Vorthan explained, "is their conflict with the Korthic Empire. The humans have been fighting for 3 standard months now, and the engagement patterns are unlike anything in our databases." Zixtara knew the Korthek well from previous observations. They were aggressive but predictable warriors who relied on overwhelming force and intimidation. Most species either surrendered quickly to Korthic advances or fought brief, costly battles before seeking terms. The fact that humans had been fighting them for 3 months was indeed unusual. "The humans are defending a mining world in the Kepler 442 system," Vorthan continued. "Initial projections suggested they would follow standard protocol fight until losses reached 15 to 20% of their forces, then either retreat or negotiate surrender. Instead, they continue fighting, despite losses that should have triggered withdrawal protocols weeks ago." The Council leader's tentacles moved in patterns that indicated puzzlement. "We need to understand their decision-making process. Are they simply ignorant of proper military conduct, or is there something else driving their behavior?" Zixtara felt their excitement growing. This sounded like exactly the kind of anomaly that made xenobiology fascinating. Every species had their quirks, their cultural peculiarities that influenced how they approached warfare. The humans were probably just another example of primitive stubbornness that would become clear once properly observed and analyzed. "Your mission," Vorthan said, "is to observe human combat behavior from close range and provide detailed analysis of their tactical decision-making, leadership structures, and psychological responses to combat stress. We particularly want to understand why they continue fighting when logic suggests they should surrender." The assignment details appeared on Zixtara's personal datapad. They would be traveling aboard the observation vessel Silent Witness, a ship specifically designed for close-range military observation without detection. The vessel's advanced stealth systems would allow them to monitor human forces from just outside their sensor range, recording everything for later analysis. "The human commander in the contested area is called Colonel Jake Martinez," Vorthan noted. "Our intelligence suggests he has been leading the defense of the mining world since the conflict began. His tactical choices will likely provide the key insights we need." Zixtara reviewed the mission parameters with growing confidence. 3 months of observation time, full access to the Silent Witness's advanced recording equipment, and a subject species that was apparently doing something interesting enough to warrant Council attention. It was the kind of assignment that could lead to significant academic recognition and perhaps advancement within the Science Council hierarchy. When do I depart? Zixthara asked. Immediately, Vorthan replied. The silent witness is waiting. At Docking Bay 7, Captain, Nixara has been briefed on your requirements and will ensure you have everything needed for comprehensive observation. As Zixthara gathered their equipment and prepared to leave, they felt the familiar thrill of beginning a new study. Humans would probably prove to be just another example of the predictable patterns that governed all military behavior across the galaxy. They might have some interesting cultural variations, perhaps some unique rituals or communication methods, but underneath it all they would follow the same basic rules that every rational species followed when faced with superior force. The transport to Docking Bay 7 was quick, and soon Zixthara was aboard the silent witness reviewing technical specifications and preparation checklists. The ship's observation systems were among the most advanced in Confederation service, capable of recording everything from individual biometric data to large-scale tactical movements. Whatever the humans were doing, Zixthara would be able to document and analyze it in complete detail. As the silent witness departed Confederation space and entered hyperspace for the journey to Kepler 442, Zixthara settled into their observation chamber and began reviewing the existing data on human military structure. Nothing in the preliminary report suggested anything particularly unusual. Standard hierarchical organization, conventional weapons and tactics, typical biological stress responses to combat situations. The journey would take 6 standard days, giving them plenty of time to prepare observation protocols and analysis frameworks. By the time they reached the human conflict zone, Zixthara would be ready to begin what they expected would be a routine, but professionally satisfying study of another species learning to wage war in the greater galaxy. The silent witness dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, and Zixthara immediately began calibrating their observation equipment. The contested mining world hung in space like a brown and gray jewel, its surface scarred by 3 months of warfare. Korthak ships moved in standard patrol patterns around the planet, while human vessels maintained defensive positions closer to the surface. Captain Nixara brought the observation ship to a position that would allow optimal monitoring of human ground forces. We are now within range of their primary forward operating base, she announced through the ship's communication system. All observation systems are active and recording. Zixthara activated their personal monitoring station and felt a surge of professional satisfaction as data began flowing across their screens. The human base appeared on the main display, a collection of prefabricated structures and defensive positions arranged in what seemed like a competent but unremarkable military layout. Approximately 300 human soldiers moved about their duties with the kind of routine efficiency that Zixthara had observed in dozens of other species. The base commander was Captain Lisa Brooks, a human female who appeared to be in her early 30s by human aging standards. Zixthara watched as she conducted what appeared to be a standard morning briefing with her senior staff. The humans displayed typical military hierarchy and communication patterns. Officers gave reports, decisions were made based on available intelligence, and orders were distributed down the chain of command. Nothing unusual so far. Sergeant Danny Wright has not returned from patrol, reported one of the human officers, a lieutenant whose name appeared on Zixthara's display as Chris Evans. His squad was due back 4 hours ago. Zixthara expected Captain Brooks to acknowledge the report and move on to other business. Lost patrols were an unfortunate but common aspect of warfare, and most rational commanders accepted such losses as the price of maintaining security around their positions. Instead, Brooks immediately stood and began issuing rapid orders. "I want a search and rescue operation organized immediately," she said. "Lieutenant Evans, take 2nd Platoon and trace Wright's last known route. Staff Sergeant Murphy, prepare medical support in case we have wounded. Communications, try to raise them on emergency frequencies." The alien observer felt a flutter of confusion. The human patrol consisted of only 6 soldiers, a tiny fraction of the base's total strength. Standard military doctrine across all known species suggested that risking additional forces to recover such a small unit was tactically unsound, especially when the missing soldiers were probably already dead. Yet, the entire base began mobilizing with an urgency that suggested the missing patrol was somehow critically important. Soldiers checked weapons, medics prepared emergency supplies, and communication specialists worked frantically to establish contact with the missing humans. The level of response was far out of proportion to the tactical value of 6 soldiers. Lieutenant Evans assembled his rescue force with remarkable speed. 24 humans volunteered for what was obviously a dangerous mission into enemy-controlled territory. Zixthara noted that these volunteers included soldiers from every section of the base, not just Evans's own unit. They were risking themselves for humans they might barely know. "Sir," said one of the volunteers, a young private whose biometric readings showed elevated stress levels, "my scanner equipment might help locate their transponders if they are still functional." "Good thinking, Amy," Evans replied. "You are with the advance team." The rescue force departed the base perimeter within 1 hour of receiving their orders. Zixthara tracked their movement through the monitoring systems, watching as they advanced through terrain that tactical analysis indicated was likely occupied by Korthic forces. The humans moved carefully but with obvious determination, calling out for their missing comrades and scanning for any signs of their presence. 3 hours into the search, the rescue team located the missing patrol. Zixthara's sensors showed that Sergeant Wright and his soldiers had been ambushed by a Korthic patrol and were trapped in a defensive position among some rocky outcroppings. 2 of the humans were wounded and their ammunition was running low. They would probably be overrun within the next hour. What happened next violated every principle of tactical logic that Zixthara understood. Instead of calling for artillery support or airstrikes that would eliminate the Korthic force efficiently, Lieutenant Evans ordered a direct assault on the enemy position. The humans attacked with an intensity that seemed almost irrational, charging across open ground under heavy fire to reach their trapped comrades. 3 more soldiers were wounded in the assault, but the Korthic forces were driven back. The rescue succeeded, but at a cost that no rational military commander should have accepted. 7 human soldiers were wounded, significant ammunition had been expended, and the tactical situation around the base had been compromised by the operation. Yet as the rescue force returned with their recovered comrades, Zixthara observed something that their xenobiology training had never prepared them to understand. The humans were celebrating. Captain Brooks personally greeted each returning soldier, and the entire base gathered to welcome back both the rescuers and the rescued. There was joy, relief, and what appeared to be genuine emotional satisfaction at the successful operation. At the same time, the humans showed obvious concern for their wounded comrades, with medical personnel and fellow soldiers providing support that went far beyond the clinical care that most species offered their injured. Zixthara reviewed the recorded data multiple times, trying to understand what they had witnessed. The humans had risked significant resources and personnel to recover 6 soldiers whose tactical value was minimal. They had accepted casualties and compromised their defensive position for what appeared to be purely emotional reasons. Yet they seemed to consider this outcome a victory rather than a tactical blunder. Why would they do this? Zixthara spoke aloud to their empty observation chamber. The question was becoming more important than they had initially realized. Over the following days, Zixthara observed more human behavior that defied standard military logic. Soldiers shared food rations with wounded comrades even when supplies were limited. Off-duty personnel volunteered for dangerous maintenance tasks to reduce the risk to essential specialists. Medical staff worked extended shifts treating minor injuries that most species would ignore until after the conflict ended. Most puzzling of all, the humans maintained high morale despite their obviously difficult situation. They told stories, shared jokes, and engaged in recreational activities during their limited free time. They acted as if their survival depended not just on military success, but on maintaining some kind of emotional bond with each other. Captain Brooks herself embodied this strange approach to command. She knew the names of every soldier under her command and regularly checked on their personal welfare. She made tactical decisions that prioritized soldier safety over mission efficiency, yet her troops responded with loyalty and determination that exceeded anything in Zixthara's database of military behavior. As the second day of observation ended, Zixthara began to realize that their assignment might be more complicated than expected. The humans were not following the rational patterns that govern military behavior across the galaxy. They were operating according to principles that seemed to prioritize individual welfare over tactical advantage, emotional satisfaction over strategic logic. This was not just another species learning to wage war in the greater galaxy. This was something else entirely. Something that challenged fundamental assumptions about how intelligent beings should behave in combat situations. Zixthara felt a growing unease as they recognized that their standard analytical frameworks might not be adequate for understanding human warfare. The real question was whether understanding humans was something that should be attempted at all. 2 weeks into the observation mission, Zixthara received an urgent communication from the Silent Witness Bridge. A massive Korthik fleet had arrived in the system and was preparing to launch what appeared to be a final assault on the human defensive positions. The primary target was Firebase Alpha, a fortified position commanded by Major Sam Carter that controlled the main approaches to the mining facilities. This will be an excellent opportunity to observe human surrender protocols, Captain Nixara commented as she adjusted the ship's position for optimal monitoring. Firebase Alpha is clearly outmatched. The humans should begin negotiation attempts within the next few hours. Zixthara prepared their recording equipment with mixed feelings. On one hand, they were eager to see how humans handled inevitable defeat, which would provide valuable data for their report. On the other hand, the strange behaviors they had already observed made them uncertain about what to expect. The humans seemed to operate by rules that defied standard military logic. Firebase Alpha housed approximately 400 human soldiers in a defensive complex that had been designed to resist moderate assault forces. The Korthik Armada approaching. The position included over 3,000 warriors supported by heavy artillery and air superiority fighters. By any rational calculation, the humans should begin surrender negotiations immediately. Instead, Major Carter called his officers together for what appeared to be a final tactical briefing. "They outnumber us 7-1, Carter announced to his assembled commanders. "We have ammunition for maybe 3 days of heavy fighting, food for a week, and no possibility of reinforcement or evacuation. Any questions?" Zixthara expected the human officers to point out the obvious futility of resistance and recommend immediate surrender. Instead, they began discussing defensive preparations and resource allocation as if they intended to fight a battle they could not possibly win. "Sir," said Lieutenant Colonel Janet Price, "if we concentrate our heavy weapons on the northern approach, we can probably hold them for at least 48 hours. That might give the mining complex time to complete their evacuation." "Good thinking," Carter replied. "What about ammunition distribution?" Captain Rob Torres stepped forward. "We have been stockpiling explosives in the lower bunkers. If we place them strategically, we can deny the Korthik's use of our facilities even after we fall." The human officers continued planning their defense with a calm professionalism that amazed Zixthara. They knew they were going to lose, knew they were probably going to die, yet they discussed tactics and logistics as if victory was still possible. More importantly, they seemed to consider their certain defeat acceptable as long as it served some larger purpose. The Korthik assault began at dawn the next day with a massive artillery barrage that should have shattered human morale immediately. Instead, Zixthara watched human soldiers emerge from their bunkers and take defensive positions with steady determination. They returned fire with weapons that were clearly outmatched, maintaining discipline under bombardment that would have broken most species. Private Amy Johnson, the young soldier Zixthara had observed during the rescue mission, volunteered to carry explosives across open ground to destroy a Korthic artillery position. The mission was obviously suicidal, yet she approached it with the same calm efficiency she had shown during routine duties. She succeeded in destroying the target but died in the explosion, and her fellow soldiers mourned her loss while immediately planning similar attacks. Staff. Sergeant Ben Murphy led counterattacks that had no hope of success but somehow disrupted Korthic advances enough to buy precious time for defensive preparations. He was wounded twice but refused medical evacuation, continuing to fight from positions that tactical analysis showed were completely untenable. When asked by his soldiers why he did not retreat to safety, he simply said he would not abandon his post while his men needed him. The siege continued for days, and Zixthara began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented. In galactic military history, the humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to make their defeat as costly as possible for their enemies, and they seemed to consider this a worthy goal in itself. Most disturbing was the human response to casualties. In every other species Zixthara had studied, losses above 15% caused immediate morale collapse and surrender attempts. Human losses at Firebase Alpha exceeded 50% by the fourth day, yet the survivors seemed to become more determined rather than less. They left personal messages for families they would never see again, then returned to fighting positions with renewed intensity. "Tell my wife I love her," Private Kevin Brooks recorded on his personal communication device before volunteering for another suicide mission against Korthic armor. Tell her this mattered. The human concept of matters was something Zixthara could not understand. What did it mean for a hopeless battle to matter? What value could there be in dying for a cause that was already lost? Yet the humans seemed to find deep meaning in their sacrifice, as if the act of resistance itself was more important than its outcome. Captain Mary Walsh, the base medical officer, embodied this incomprehensible human attitude. As the Korthic forces closed in on the medical bunker, she continued treating wounded soldiers even though she knew the position would be overrun within hours. She worked with steady hands while explosions shook the building around her, saving lives that would probably be lost when the base fell. "Why do you continue?" Zixthara found themselves speaking aloud to their observation screens. "Why do you not surrender and save yourselves?" The answer came from an unexpected source. During a brief lull in the fighting, Major Carter made a general announcement to his remaining troops. His words were broadcast on open frequencies, and Zixthara recorded every syllable. "I know some of you are wondering why we keep fighting when we cannot win," Carter said. "The answer is simple. We fight because they are depending on us to fight. The civilians we are protecting, the soldiers at other bases who need time to prepare their defenses, the families back home who are counting on us to stand between them and this threat. We fight because that is what humans do when something important is at stake." Zixthara replayed the recording multiple times, analyzing the emotional undertones and physiological responses of the human soldiers who heard it, rather than despair or resignation. They showed increased determination and what appeared to be genuine pride in their situation. They were proud to be dying for others, proud to be making a stand that everyone knew was hopeless. The final assault came on the 7th day. Firebase Alpha was overrun after a desperate last stand that cost the Korthics nearly half their attacking force. Major Carter and his remaining soldiers fought to the end, destroying equipment and facilities to deny them to the enemy. The last transmission from the base was Carter's voice reporting that demolition charges had been activated and the position was no longer tactically useful to either side. Firebase Alpha had accomplished nothing strategically significant. The mining complex it protected was captured anyway, and the delay in Korthic operations was minimal in the larger context of the war. Yet, as Zixthara reviewed the recordings of the siege, they realized they had witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about intelligent behavior in warfare. The humans had chosen to die rather than surrender, not because death offered any tactical advantage, but because they believed their sacrifice served some greater purpose. They had found meaning in hopeless resistance, value in certain defeat, victory in absolute loss. These concepts were so alien to Zixthara-S, understanding that they began to question whether humans could be analyzed using xenobiological methods. More troubling was the growing realization that watching humans die for their incomprehensible principles was affecting the observer in ways that their training had not prepared them to handle. Zixthara found themselves experiencing something their species called empathy sickness, an unhealthy emotional resonance with subjects that could compromise scientific objectivity. For the first time since beginning the mission, Zixthara wondered whether some things were too dangerous to observe, whether some knowledge was too costly to acquire. The humans were revealing aspects of warfare and sacrifice that might be better left undocumented, but the mission was only half complete, and there was still so much about human behavior that remained mysterious and terrifying. The fall of Firebase Alpha sent shockwaves through both the human and Korthic forces, though for completely different reasons. Zixthara monitored communications between Korthic commanders and discovered that they were deeply disturbed by the cost of their victory. Losing nearly half an assault force to capture a position that the defenders had ultimately destroyed anyway was not the kind of warfare the Korthics understood or appreciated. "These humans are insane," one Korthic general transmitted to his superiors. "They fight like cornered animals, but worse. Animals surrender when defeat is certain. These creatures seem to become more dangerous as their situation becomes more hopeless." Zixthara found themselves agreeing with the Korthic assessment, though probably not in the way the alien general intended. The humans were indeed becoming more dangerous as defeat became more certain, but not through any tactical innovation or technological advantage. They were becoming dangerous because they refused to accept the logic of overwhelming force, the rational calculation that should lead to surrender when resistance became futile. The observer's attention was now focused on the human retreat from the contested mining world. General Kate Phillips had been ordered to evacuate her remaining forces to defensible positions in the outer system, a standard military maneuver that should have proceeded according to established protocols. Zixthara expected to see orderly withdrawal, preservation of equipment and personnel, and tactical positioning for future engagements. Instead, they witnessed something that defied every principle of rational military conduct: the human rearguard. Actions were not designed to preserve the retreating force. They were designed to inflict maximum casualties on the pursuing Korthics, regardless of the cost to the defenders. Small units positioned themselves in tactically hopeless positions and fought to the death to buy their comrades mere minutes of additional escape time. Corporal Tim Rodriguez took position on a bridge that controlled access to a major evacuation route. Intelligence reports indicated that an entire Korthic battalion was approaching the crossing, over 300 enemy warriors against one human soldier. Standard doctrine called for demolishing the bridge and withdrawing to the next defensive line. Rodriguez demolished the bridge as ordered, but then remained in position to defend the rubble pile with his personal weapons. Zixthara watched in horrified fascination as the lone human soldier engaged a force that outnumbered him 300 to 1. He had no hope of victory, no possibility of survival, no tactical objective beyond delaying the Korthic advance for a few precious minutes. Yet he fought with the same steady determination that Zixthara had observed in every human engagement. The battle lasted 17 minutes. Rodriguez killed 43 Korthic warriors and wounded dozens more before his position was finally overrun. The delay he provided allowed 3 transport ships carrying wounded human soldiers to escape the system. By any rational calculation, the trade was absurd: one human life to save perhaps 50 others, when surrender might have preserved everyone, but the humans did not seem to calculate such exchanges rationally. Medic Sarah Walsh refuses evacuation, reported one of the human transport commanders. She insists on remaining to treat wounded Korthic prisoners as well as our own injured. Zixthara watched as the human medical officer worked frantically to save lives in a field hospital that was clearly going to be overrun within hours. Walsh treated human and Korthak wounded with equal care, following what appeared to be some kind of medical code that transcended military loyalty. She knew she was going to die, knew her efforts would probably be meaningless in the larger context of the war, yet she continued working with steady hands while artillery fire grew closer. "Why do you not evacuate?" Zixthara spoke to their observation. Screens again, the question becoming a desperate plea for understanding. "Why do you choose to die for enemies who would not do the same for you?" The answer came from Walsh herself, recorded on her personal communication device as explosions shook the medical facility around her. "I became a doctor to save lives," she said. "It does not matter whose lives they are. These Korthak soldiers are somebody's children, somebody's family. If I can help them live, then my being here means something important." The concept of meaning appeared again and again in human communications, as if dying for principles was somehow more valuable than living without them. Zixthara could not understand how intelligent beings could place abstract concepts above survival, could choose certain death over probable life. The breaking point came when Zixthara witnessed the evacuation of a human field hospital that was under direct bombardment. Dr. Helen Ross had been ordered to abandon the facility and evacuate with her medical staff, but she refused to leave her patients. The Korthak artillery was targeting the hospital specifically, knowing that destroying medical facilities would demoralize human forces. Dr. Ross and her staff continued operating on wounded soldiers even as shells destroyed the building around them. They worked by emergency lighting when the power failed, continuing surgical procedures while chunks of concrete fell from the ceiling. 2 nurses were killed by shrapnel, but the surviving medical personnel kept working. "Patient in room 7. Needs immediate surgery," Dr. Ross announced calmly as another explosion shook the building. "Jennifer, can you assist while I finish with this abdominal wound?" Nurse Jennifer Gray moved to help her colleague while blood from a head wound ran down her own face. They were saving lives they knew would probably be lost in the next engagement, treating injuries that might be inflicted again within days, preserving human soldiers who would inevitably face death in subsequent battles. Zixthara finally understood the true horror of what they were observing. The humans were not fighting a war in any conventional sense. They were fighting a crusade, a holy mission that transcended tactical objectives or strategic goals. Every sacrifice was meaningful to them. Every death served some greater purpose that had nothing to do with winning or losing the immediate conflict. The medical facility was finally destroyed by a direct hit that killed Dr. Ross and her remaining staff. They died while attempting to evacuate their patients, carrying wounded soldiers toward dubious safety, even as the building collapsed around them. The last transmission from the hospital was Dr. Ross requesting additional transport for patients who were already beyond saving. As Zixthara reviewed the recordings of the hospital's destruction, they realized that something fundamental had changed in their perspective on the mission. The clinical detachment that was supposed to characterize scientific observation had given way to something else. Something that their species recognized as dangerous. Empathy sickness was progressing beyond the early stages. Zixthara was beginning to identify emotionally with their subjects, to feel genuine distress at human suffering, to experience what could only be described as admiration for human sacrifice. These were not appropriate responses for a xenobiological observer. "Perhaps humans cannot be studied safely," Zixthara recorded in their personal log. "Perhaps some behaviors are too alien to observe without being affected by them." The realization was deeply troubling. If humans could not be understood through conventional scientific methods, what did that mean for the galaxy's relationship with this strange species? If even observing them from a distance could compromise the mental stability of trained xenobiologists, what would direct contact with humans do to other species? More importantly, what would the final phases of this conflict reveal about human nature? Zixthara had already witnessed behaviors that challenged fundamental assumptions about rational intelligence. The war was approaching its climax, and the humans showed no signs of becoming more conventional in their approach to warfare. If anything, they seemed to be becoming more extreme, more willing to sacrifice everything for principles that other species could not even comprehend. The final battle would either provide the key to understanding human psychology or demonstrate that some aspects of the universe were too dangerous to understand. Zixthara prepared their equipment for the concluding phase of observation while fighting the growing certainty that they were documenting something that should never be shared with the wider galaxy. Some knowledge was too terrible to possess, and some truths were too dangerous to reveal. The humans were about to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of, and Zixthara was beginning to fear that no one was prepared for that revelation. The final phase of the human conflict began with a revelation that changed everything Zixthara thought they understood about their mission. While monitoring Confederation military communications, the observer discovered that their assignment was not what they had been told. The Science Council had not sent them to study human tactics for academic purposes. They had sent them to determine whether humans could be controlled, negotiated with, or manipulated like other galactic species. The answer was becoming terrifyingly clear. Commander Alex Stone's fleet hung in space above the contested mining world, preparing for what everyone knew would be the final battle of the campaign. The Korthic Empire had assembled overwhelming force for this engagement, nearly 200 warships against the humans' 37 vessels. Most of Stone's ships showed damage from previous battles, and supply reports indicated critical shortages of ammunition, fuel, and replacement parts. Any rational species would have sought terms at this point. The strategic value of the mining world was negligible compared to the cost of continued resistance. Humanitarian considerations alone should have prompted surrender. Negotiations to preserve the lives of the remaining human soldiers and civilians. In the system, instead, Commander Stone called a fleet conference that revealed the true depth of human psychological abnormality. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stone announced to his assembled ship commanders, "we all know the situation. We are outnumbered, outgunned, and operating with equipment that should have been replaced months ago. Command has given us discretion to negotiate. Surrender if we believe continued resistance is futile." Zixthara expected immediate discussion of surrender terms and prisoner exchange protocols. The human commanders were intelligent beings who could presumably calculate odds and make rational decisions based on available data. "Any thoughts?" Stone asked his officers. Captain Tony Roberts of the heavy cruiser New York spoke first. "Sir, we have been fighting these bastards for 3 months. They have killed thousands of our people, destroyed our installations, and generally made life miserable for everyone in this system. I do not think we should give them the satisfaction of surrender." Commander Lisa Chun of the destroyer Boston nodded agreement. "My crew has been asking when we get to ram something. Apparently this is their idea of a good time." Zixthara felt their breathing slits constrict in shock. The humans were not discussing surrender. They were discussing suicide attacks as if they were routine tactical options. More disturbing, the suggestion seemed to generate enthusiasm rather than horror among the assembled commanders. "The mining platform has been rigged for demolition," reported Captain Mark Taylor of the engineering vessel Houston. "If we are going down, we can make sure the Korthics get nothing useful from this system." "Good," Stone replied. "What about our people on the surface?" "Most civilians have been evacuated," said Commander Janet Miller. "The remaining personnel are volunteers who insisted on staying to operate the demolition charges. They understand the situation." The fleet commanders continued planning their final battle with the same calm professionalism that Zixthara had observed throughout the conflict. They knew they were planning their own deaths, knew they could not achieve any meaningful military objective, yet they approached the discussion as if they were organizing a routine patrol mission. "We will deploy in standard attack formation," Stone announced. "Individual ship commanders have discretion to engage targets of opportunity, but the primary objective is to inflict maximum casualties on the Korthic fleet." "Any questions, Commander?" David Chang raised his hand. "Sir, do we have any specific rules of engagement for this operation?" "Yes," Stone replied. "Make them remember us." The final battle began 18 hours later with a human attack that violated every principle of Naval warfare that Zixthara understood. Instead of seeking advantageous positioning or concentrating fire on high-value targets, the human ships charged directly into the center of the Korthik formation with no apparent regard for their own survival. The heavy cruiser New York rammed the Korthik flagship at maximum acceleration, destroying both vessels in a spectacular explosion that sent debris across half the battlefield. Captain Roberts transmitted his final message just before impact. "This is for Firebase Alpha, you alien sons of bitches." Pilot Nancy Green of the fighter squadron based on the carrier Enterprise manually guided her damaged interceptor into the bridge of a Korthik battlecruiser after her weapon systems failed. Her last transmission was a cheerful, "See you on the other side, boys," that she broadcast to her squadron mates who were watching her die. Engineer Paul Wright overloaded his ship's reactor in a calculated sacrifice that took out 3 Korthik vessels in the resulting explosion. He spent his final minutes recording a message for his family back on Earth, explaining that he loved them and that his death had meaning because it would protect them from the Korthik threat. The battle continued for 6 hours, and by the end, the human fleet had been completely destroyed. But the Korthiks had lost over 60% of their attacking force, casualties so severe that their empire would need months to recover. More importantly, the psychological impact of the engagement was devastating to Korthik morale. "These humans are not a species," one surviving Korthik commander transmitted to his superiors. "They are a plague. They fight like demons and die like martyrs. We cannot coexist with beings who consider death in battle to be a reward rather than a tragedy." Zixthara understood now why the Confederation had really sent them to observe human warfare. The question was not whether humans could be defeated militarily. Any species could be overwhelmed by sufficient force. The question was whether defeating humans was worth the cost, and whether the survivors of such a victory could live with the knowledge of what they had done to achieve it. The humans had revealed something terrifying about their nature during this conflict. They did not fight wars for territory or resources or political advantage. They fought crusades for principles that transcended individual survival. They formed emotional bonds so strong that they would die for strangers, sacrifice strategic advantage to save a single comrade, choose certain death over uncertain surrender. Most horrifying of all, they seemed to consider this behavior normal. They called it duty, honor, love for their fellow humans. They told stories about it, sang songs about it, taught their children to admire it. The capacity for extreme sacrifice was not a rare aberration among humans. It was a fundamental aspect of their psychology. "What have we discovered?" Zixthara spoke to their empty observation chamber. "What kind of species produces individuals who choose to become monsters in defense of what they love?" The answer was more troubling than the question. Humans produce such individuals routinely, naturally, as a normal part of their social development. The warriors Zixthara had observed were not exceptional humans. They were ordinary examples of their species responding to threat according to deeply ingrained cultural and psychological patterns. This had profound implications for galactic civilization. If humans could not be defeated through conventional warfare, and if they could not be negotiated with using rational appeals to self-interest, then how could other species coexist with them? What happened when human crusading psychology turned its attention to galactic politics, trade disputes, or territorial conflicts? The humans had won their first interstellar war through methods that terrified their enemies into seeking peace. They had achieved victory not through superior technology or tactics, but through their willingness to pay any price for their principles. The Korthik Empire, faced with an enemy that literally could not be defeated because they refused to accept defeat, had sued for peace rather than face the cost of continued warfare. Zixthara realized that their true mission was now clear. They had been sent to determine whether humanity represented a threat to galactic stability, whether this strange species could be integrated into the Confederation's orderly civilization. The answer was both yes and no in ways that made the question itself meaningless. Humans were not a threat in any conventional sense. They seemed genuinely peaceful when not attacked, and their technology was not advanced enough to challenge established galactic powers. But they were something else, something that had no precedent in the galaxy's long history of interspecies relations. They were a species that could not be conquered, could not be intimidated, could not be reasoned with when their fundamental values were threatened. They were a species that became more dangerous as their situation became more hopeless, that found meaning in sacrifice and victory in defeat. Most terrifying of all, they did it while still believing themselves to be the heroes of their own story. The final realization hit Zixtara like a physical blow. In studying humans, they had begun to understand them, and understanding humans changed you in ways that could never be undone. The silent witness drifted through the debris field that had once been two opposing fleets, and Zixtara stared at their observation screens with growing horror at what they had documented. The human victory was complete in every sense that mattered, though it had cost them everything they had committed to the battle. The Korthic Empire was withdrawing from human space, seeking peace negotiations that would prevent further encounters with warriors who fought like avenging spirits, but victory was not the most disturbing aspect of what Zixtara had witnessed. The most disturbing aspect was their own reaction to it. Somewhere during the long weeks of observation, something fundamental had changed in the alien observer's perspective. When Captain Roberts had rammed his ship into the Korthic flagship, Zixtara had felt a surge of what could only be described as approval. When Pilot Green had sacrificed herself to save her squadron mates, the observer had experienced something dangerously close to admiration. When Engineer Wright had died to protect his family, Zixtara had understood his choice in a way that no rational being should have been able to understand. The empathy sickness had progressed beyond the early stages. Zixtara was no longer observing human behavior. They were beginning to think like a human. Final mission report. They spoke to their recording system, then stopped. How could they possibly describe what they had seen to the Confederation? Science Council. How could they explain that humans were not just another warrior species, but something entirely outside the galaxy's understanding of rational behavior? The truth would terrify the Council. A species that could not be defeated through conventional means, that became more dangerous when cornered, that fought crusades instead of wars. Such beings represented a fundamental challenge to the orderly galaxy that the Confederation had spent millennia creating. Fear of humans could lead to preemptive action, attempts to eliminate the threat before it grew beyond control. But the alternative, hiding the truth, was equally problematic. Other species needed to understand what they were dealing with when they encountered humans. The galaxy needed to know that this strange species operated according to psychological principles that defied rational analysis. Zixtara began recording their official report, choosing each word carefully. Human military capabilities are within acceptable parameters for a developing species, they stated, their voice steady despite the lie they were telling. Their technology is adequate but not exceptional. Their tactical doctrine shows competence but follows conventional patterns. Integration into galactic civilization should proceed without significant complications. The words felt like poison in their mouth, but the alternative was worse. If the galaxy learned the truth about human psychology, about their willingness to die for abstract principles and their ability to form emotional bonds that transcended rational self-interest, the result would be fear. And fear would lead to attempts to control or eliminate humanity before they became too powerful to stop. Zixtara created a second report, hidden in encrypted files that would be discovered only if something happened to the official version. This report contained everything: the recordings of human sacrifice, the documentation of their impossible determination, the evidence of their crusading psychology. If the galaxy ever needed to understand what humans truly were, the information would be available, but that understanding would come at a terrible price. Personal log, final entry. Zixtara continued recording. The mission parameters were fatally flawed from the beginning. Humans cannot be studied using conventional xenobiological methods because observing them changes the observer. Their psychology is contagious in ways that our science does not understand. The admission was painful but necessary. Zixtara could feel the change in their own thinking, the growing tendency to evaluate situations according to human-like emotional criteria rather than rational analysis. They had begun to understand concepts like duty, honor, and sacrifice, not as abstract principles but as compelling motivations for action. Recommendation: future contact with humans should be approached with extreme caution. They are not dangerous in any conventional military sense, but they represent a fundamental challenge to rational civilization. Their ability to inspire irrational loyalty and extreme sacrifice could destabilize galactic society if it spreads to other species. The journey back to Confederation space took 6 days, and Zixtara spent the time reviewing their recordings and trying to understand what had happened to their professional objectivity. The humans they had observed were not exceptional individuals, they were ordinary members of their species, responding to crisis according to deeply ingrained cultural patterns. This suggested that similar behavior could be expected from any human population under sufficient stress. The implications were staggering. If humans could routinely produce individuals willing to die for strangers, to sacrifice everything for abstract principles, to choose certain death over uncertain surrender, then they represented something unprecedented in galactic history. They were a species that could not be conquered because they would never accept conquest, could not be intimidated because they valued honor more than life, could not be reasoned with when their fundamental beliefs were challenged. Most terrifying of all, they seemed to consider this behavior admirable rather than pathological upon returning to Confederation space. Zixtara submitted their official report and requested immediate retirement from active xenobiological service. The request was granted without question. Empathy sickness was a recognized occupational hazard for observers who spent too much time studying alien species, but retirement could not undo the knowledge they had gained or the changes that knowledge had wrought in their thinking. Zixtara found themselves haunted by memories of human voices raised in battle songs while their ships burned around them. They dreamed of soldiers who died laughing, of medics who treated enemies with the same care they showed their own wounded, of commanders who chose certain death over possible dishonor. The worst part was that they had begun to understand these choices, to see them as something other than mental aberrations. The humans had shown them a way of thinking that valued meaning over survival, that found victory in defeat and honor in sacrifice. These concepts had no place in rational civilization, yet they possessed a terrible beauty that called to something. Deep in the observer's consciousness, Zixtara spent their retirement years in quiet isolation, never speaking of what they had witnessed in human space. They became a scholar of ancient history, studying the rise and fall of forgotten civilizations with the kind of detached analysis that had once characterized their xenobiological work. But always, in the quiet moments between research and sleep, they heard the echoes of human battle hymns and wondered what kind of galaxy they had helped to preserve through their silence. The final entry in their personal journal, written years after the mission's end, contained a confession that they never intended anyone to read. I have learned that some truths are too dangerous to share and some knowledge too terrible to possess. The humans showed me what intelligent beings are capable of when they choose principles over survival, when they value the welfare of others above their own lives. They showed me what it means to be heroic in a universe that rewards only rational self-interest. I wish I had refused the assignment. I wish I had never learned that such beings exist. But I cannot unknow what I have learned, cannot unsee what I have witnessed. The humans are coming to the stars, and they will bring their impossible psychology with them. The galaxy will never be the same. Perhaps that is for the best. Perhaps rational civilization needs to be challenged by beings who believe in something more than their own survival. Perhaps the universe needs heroes, even if the rest of us are too sensible to be heroic ourselves. But I fear the price we will all pay for learning what humanity has to teach us. Some lessons change you in ways that can never be undone. Some knowledge transforms you into something you never intended to become. I observed humans in battle, and I wish I had refused. But I cannot regret what I learned, even though it has made me a stranger to my own species. The humans have shown me what we could be if we had the courage to be more than merely rational. That knowledge is worth any price, even the price of never being able to go home again. The journal was found among Zixthora's possessions after their death, along with the encrypted files containing the true record of human warfare. Both documents were quietly archived in the deepest vaults of the Confederation Science Council, where they wait for the day when the galaxy is ready to learn what humanity really is. That day may never come. Some truths are too dangerous for civilization to bear, but the truth remains, hidden but not destroyed, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to seek it out. The humans are among the stars now, and their impossible psychology spreads wherever they go. The galaxy will learn, eventually, what Zixthora learned through observation. Some species become monsters to protect what they love, and perhaps that is what heroes really are, monsters pointed in the right direction, creatures willing to sacrifice everything for something greater than themselves.